She faked her own death and left a shocking will. What her children discovered will change their lives forever. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon. Sophia watched her children around the table, her heart heavy. The three of them were there, but it felt as if each one was in a distant world, wrapped in layers of absence and distance she no longer knew how to bridge. Miguel, her eldest, was checking emails on his phone with an expression of urgency, the typical demeanor of the businessman he had become. Camila, sitting beside him, held a rigid posture and a cold expression, as if just waiting for the right moment to say goodbye. And Raúl, the youngest, was distracted by the reflections on his phone screen, displaying the same casual arrogance that had always been typical of him. Sophia, with a look full of sorrow, felt that her children were distant from the values she had worked so hard to instill. That night, after everyone had left, Sophia sat alone in silence, consumed by a profound sadness. She remembered how she had always wanted her children to be compassionate and close-knit, how she had tried to teach them the importance of empathy, humility, and family connection. But something seemed to have been lost along the way. Miguel had become a ruthless leader, incapable of listening. Camila, a successful attorney, was impenetrable and indifferent. And Raúl, always chasing pleasure, had turned into a young man empty and materialistic. After many days of reflection, Sophia shared her anguish with her niece Teresa, who listened attentively. Teresa, a sensitive young woman close to Sophia, suggested a bold idea. A plan that would shock the children and force them to re-evaluate their values. They spent the next few weeks planning every detail. On the agreed day, Teresa made the phone call that would change the course of the family. Her voice choked as she delivered the news. Sophia had suddenly passed away. The children, stunned and gripped by a mixture of shock and disbelief, each reacted in their own way. Miguel kept a controlled expression, though his gaze was lost. Camila sighed, treating the news as a practical event to deal with, and Raúl, frightened and stunned, muttered to himself in disbelief. The funeral was a quiet event, just as Sophia had wanted. The children attended more out of obligation than grief, each lost in their own thoughts. But the real surprise was yet to come, reserved for the moment that followed. After the funeral, the three siblings gathered in the house where they had grown up. The atmosphere was strange, almost uncomfortable. Miguel was impatient, glancing at his watch frequently. Camila remained distant, her expression serious, while Raúl seemed merely distracted, as if this meeting was an obligation he wished to complete quickly. When the family lawyer, an elderly and calm man named Mr. Batista, arrived, the tension in the room thickened. He carried a worn leather briefcase full of papers and settled into an armchair in the center of the room, looking at the siblings with a grave expression. Teresa was there as well, seated beside the lawyer, silently observing her cousin's reactions. Mr. Batista opened the briefcase, pulled out a document, and, in a firm voice, began reading Sophia's will. The opening words carried an unexpected weight. Sophia hadn't just left material assets to be divided. She had, in fact, left a final request, a request that would serve as a challenge for each of her children. "Each of you must complete a task I have carefully chosen," Mr. Batista announced, reading Sophia's exact words. "Only after completing these challenges will you be entitled to the inheritance." The room fell into absolute silence. Camila raised an eyebrow, incredulous. Miguel, a mix of confusion and irritation crossing his face, frowned, and Raúl let out a mocking laugh, not understanding the seriousness of the situation. But the lawyer continued. For Miguel, the challenge was clear. He was to spend 2 weeks at a spiritual retreat in a monastery, where he would have to maintain absolute silence and help with the upkeep of the place. For a man used to being in command, the idea of silence and a lack of control was unthinkable. "This is ridiculous," he said, crossing his arms. "My mother can't be serious." Camilla, for her part, listened to her challenge with a cold detachment. She was to work at a support clinic for victims of violence, providing not only legal assistance, but also helping with daily care for those in need. She, who had always prided herself on her objectivity and emotional distance, now faced a mission that required compassion, something she had long set aside. Raoul, with a sarcastic expression, heard that he would need to spend a month in a fishing village, learning to live without luxury and assisting with local tasks. The very thought of facing such a modest routine seemed like a punishment. He, who had never given up comfort, now had to confront the hardships of a simple life. The lawyer paused, allowing each of them a moment to absorb the information, but none of them took it well. "This is absurd," Miguel finally declared. "Our mother didn't know us well enough to impose something like this." Then Teresa, who had been silently observing, intervened. "Aunt Sophia knew you all better than you think. She believed these challenges might teach you something you've forgotten. You can choose not to go through with them, but that means giving up the inheritance." Oh, the weight of Teresa's words settled over them. Although reluctant and irritated, they all knew that giving up the inheritance was not an option. Their mother's fortune was not just about money. It represented the final bond with everything that remained of her. And so, with looks of discontent but resignation, each one accepted the task. They left the house, heading toward different paths and a mission that would transform their lives in ways they could not yet foresee. Miguel looked out at the barren, silent landscape surrounding the monastery, incredulous that he was actually there. After a long journey to this isolated place, each step he took seemed to lead him further away from his usual life. Accustomed to being at the center of decisions, with a hectic routine full of responsibilities, Miguel now faced an almost incomprehensible challenge: absolute silence and the necessity of confronting his own thoughts. Upon arrival, one of the monks greeted him and gave him clear instructions. For the next 2 weeks, he was not to speak and would be required to participate in all monastery tasks. He would help prepare meals, clean the corridors, and tend to the small garden, all of it in complete silence. During the first days, Miguel tried to adapt to the routine. Being methodical and organized, he approached the activities as practical tasks, without giving much thought to what lay behind each of them. He tried to escape the silence by filling his mind with future plans, strategies for his business, and commitments left back in the city. But as the hours went by, he felt increasingly uncomfortable. The voices in his mind became chaotic, like a constant noise he no longer knew how to silence. On the first night, Miguel nearly gave up. The silence around him brought back fragments of conversations, unresolved arguments, even words from his mother that he had always ignored. He felt suffocated, but something inside him kept him from quitting, perhaps a mixture of pride and the certainty that somehow he needed to prove to himself that he could do this. As the days passed, Miguel began noticing the details of the monastery. He observed how the monks communicated only with glances or small gestures, as if every movement was enough to convey a message. He started to sense the harmony among them, and how silence seemed to fill them with peace. Slowly, Miguel found himself trying to mimic the way they went about their tasks, with a calm and serene rhythm, something that had once seemed impossible to him. One morning, while quietly tending the garden, he felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. The touch of the soil, the sound of the wind, and the distant song of birds formed a melody he had never noticed before. It was as if for a moment he had stepped outside himself and found a new tranquility. There, in the absolute silence, Miguel began to realize how much he had lost by always chasing power and control. In the nights that followed, his once restless sleep became peaceful. For the first time in a long while, Miguel started to feel that silence, once unbearable, could be an ally, a way to reconnect with himself. He began to look at the monks and their routines, not with arrogance, but with respect. And gradually he began to question himself. What, after all, was he so urgently seeking in life? By the end of that week, Miguel felt different, as if he had discovered a new way to see the world and himself. Camilla looked at the simple facade of the clinic with a mix of discomfort and skepticism. It was a modest place, surrounded by worn walls and carrying a faint smell of cleaning products mixed into the air. She took a deep breath before entering, adjusting her posture and preparing herself for what, to her, would only be a temporary obligation. As soon as she stepped through the door, she was greeted by Donna Marta, one of the clinic's coordinators. Marta was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile that to Camilla felt almost too familiar. Without much preamble, Marta explained her duties. Beyond providing legal guidance to patients, she would also need to assist with the clinic's daily activities, from preparing meals to organizing recreational activities. Camilla tried to keep a neutral expression, but felt increasingly uneasy about the idea of getting so directly involved with the people there. Her first task was to speak with one of the patients, a young woman named Luisa, who needed guidance with a delicate legal matter. Camilla, accustomed to the formalities of the courtroom, tried to keep the conversation strictly professional. However, Luisa was nothing like the sophisticated clients Camilla was used to serving. She was a fragile young woman with a soft voice, and her eyes carried a deep pain. As she explained her case, Luisa began to cry, and Camilla found herself momentarily disarmed. She felt a pang of compassion, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Over the following days, Camilla continued her work at the clinic with reluctance. She felt out of place and avoided emotional involvement with the patients as much as possible. However, the daily interactions and the responsibility of dealing with lives so different from her own began to chip away at her defenses. She watched with a hint of surprise how devoted the clinic staff were, offering more than just professional support. They provided comfort, love, and understanding. On one particularly challenging afternoon, Camilla was asked to help Luisa with a recreational activity. Initially hesitant, she participated without much enthusiasm until she noticed how animated Luisa became when she talked about her childhood and small dreams she kept close. For the first time, Camilla allowed herself to smile genuinely as she watched the young woman open up. As the days passed, Camilla began to notice changes within herself. With every conversation, every smile, and every word of support, she realized how this experience was removing the armor she had built over the years. There was a vulnerability there that she had tried to avoid, but now it felt inevitable. One night, after finishing her shift, Camilla found herself reflecting on the stories she had heard and how connected she felt to people she would have once judged without hesitation. She felt something new within her, a strength that came not from the cold logic of the courtroom, but from a compassion she was only now beginning to rediscover. Raúl looked around, confused and slightly disgusted, as he walked through the small fishing village where he would spend the next few weeks. Accustomed to the comforts of city life and luxuries he considered essential, he could hardly believe his mother had the audacity to leave him in a place so simple. The strong smell of fish and the sound of waves crashing against old boats surrounded him, and he felt a wave of repulsion. Everything here seemed too rustic, and he couldn't understand how anyone could live like this. He was greeted by a man with a sun-weathered face and calloused hands, named Sir João. With a welcoming smile and a hoarse voice, Sir João explained that Raúl would have to adapt to the fisherman's routine, waking up before dawn, helping with the fishing, cleaning the boats, and repairing the nets. Raoul laughed, incredulous, thinking there must be some mistake. But there wasn't, and with no other option, he accepted, though with an air of superiority and the attitude of someone there purely out of obligation. On the first day, Raoul already felt defeated. Waking up before sunrise, facing the cold sea, and enduring the physically exhausting labor was beyond anything he had ever imagined he could handle. His hands, used only to gripping the wheel of a sports car, were sore and rough. His arms, which rarely lifted anything heavier than a glass, ached with every pull of the net. By the second week, however, something began to change. Raoul noticed the patience and respect the fishermen had for the sea and how they worked as a team, looking out for one another. Watching these men and women who dedicated their lives to sustaining the community, he began to feel an unexpected respect. With each net repaired, each boat cleaned, he found himself less uncomfortable and more willing to participate. One evening, while having dinner with the fishermen's families, Raoul felt for the first time part of something bigger. Sharing bread and listening to stories about the sea and village life made him reflect on the life he led and the choices he had made up to that point. He realized that these fishermen with so little possessed an invisible wealth he had never known, a genuine connection with people and the world around them. As the days went on, Raoul began to be seen as a dedicated, less arrogant helper. Although he still had moments of resistance, he started to appreciate the simplicity of that life, feeling a new sense of pride when he saw the fish caught and the nets repaired by his own hands. And so, amidst the smell of salt and the hardship of work, Raoul began to understand that perhaps there was more to life than the luxury he had always valued. Miguel was now in the second week of the retreat, and something within him had changed profoundly. In the first days, the absolute silence and the deprivation of his usual routine had been tormenting, but now he no longer felt as much resistance. On the contrary, he was beginning to find a kind of peace he had never imagined. He woke before dawn, appreciating the freshness of the mornings and the serene sounds of the monastery. Surrounded by the soft songs of birds and the gentle breeze, he went about his tasks in silence, free from the pressure of making important decisions or worrying about the next contract. The absence of any need for control had brought him an unexpected calm, a pause in life that he once considered impossible. One morning, while watering the garden, Miguel noticed the gaze of one of the older monks, Brother Tomas, who was watching his work with a slight smile. Without saying a word, the monk gestured for him to follow him to the garden. Miguel followed, and they both sat on a bench beneath a large tree. Tomas pointed to the leaves dancing in the wind, and with a gentle movement of his hand, suggested that Miguel simply observe. Over time, Miguel began to understand the message behind Brother Tomas's gesture. The silence around him, the simplicity of nature, everything there seemed to convey a truth about life that he had never grasped. Sitting in that garden, Miguel finally understood that throughout his life he had been distracted by noise, the noise of success, achievements, and ambitions. He had never truly experienced the power of presence. As the days went by, he began to feel a deep respect for the monks, for the way they lived, and for what they seemed to embody. He understood that true power did not lie in command, but in the ability to listen, to observe, to understand oneself and others in silence. The simple tasks he once deemed worthless, washing dishes, planting, harvesting, cleaning the monastery, became almost meditative for him. On a quiet night, while walking through the dark hallways of the monastery, Miguel felt a peace he had never imagined. He realized with overwhelming intensity that the control he had always sought was an illusion. In truth, he didn't need to control the world around him. He only needed to find harmony within himself. That night, Miguel slept as he hadn't in years, without the weight of responsibility, without the noise of his thoughts. In the absolute silence, he had found a peace that would transform his view of life and of what truly mattered. Camila was now in her third week of work at the clinic, and the worn walls of the place, once a source of discomfort, now seemed welcoming. Every corner of that simple space held stories, and for the first time, she felt part of them, even if she still resisted getting emotionally involved with the patients. Camila still believed that her distant posture was necessary, a defense against the pain these patients faced every day. But little by little, something within her began to change. One afternoon, while organizing documents and pending cases, Camila heard a familiar voice calling her. It was Luisa, the young woman she had met when she first arrived at the clinic, the same one who had asked for her help with legal issues. Camila was surprised to see the soft expression on the young woman's face, as if, for a moment, she had forgotten her pain. Luisa was holding a few papers, and her request was simple: help organizing her few belongings so she could feel more at peace in this temporary environment. They sat together in a small lounge area. While they folded clothes and placed belongings in a box, Luisa began sharing stories from her childhood, little memories she carried with tenderness and longing. She talked about the house where she grew up, the sunny afternoons spent playing with her siblings, and the dreams she still held close. The pain in her eyes contrasted with the gentle smile that appeared as she recalled those times. Camila listened in silence, surprised at the depth of emotions she felt as she listened to the young woman. During that conversation, a new feeling took hold of Camila. She, who had always shielded herself with formality and professionalism, felt an uncontrollable urge to simply be there, present, and to listen. Truly listen, with an open heart, without searching for quick answers or practical solutions. For the first time, she allowed herself to drop her barriers and connect with someone in a way she rarely did, even in her own life. In the days that followed, Camila began to involve herself more in the clinic's activities, volunteering for tasks that had once seemed insignificant. She helped in the kitchen, prepared meals, and organized small recreational activities for the patients. Contrary to what she had imagined, these small actions didn't make her feel lesser or outside her professional role. On the contrary, with every smile she received, every word of thanks, Camila felt more useful, more connected to others, and more in touch with herself. There was something about being with these people that made her see the world from a new perspective. Before, she dealt only with cases, contracts, and legal strategies. Now, she saw the faces, the emotions, and the stories behind the cases. She remembered one evening when she helped an elderly woman organize her luggage, listening to her recount, with emotion, memories of her late husband and their shared life. It was a life, a love, a story that became part of her own, even if only temporarily. The closeness with the patients and the clinic team brought her the awareness of how emotionally disconnected she had always been. The rigid, professional stance she had cultivated was, in truth, a shield against her own vulnerabilities. Over the years, Camila had become a practical, logical person, trained to avoid any form of involvement that might compromise her judgment. But here, at the clinic, surrounded by people who were fragile yet resilient, she began to understand that being vulnerable wasn't a sign of weakness, but of strength. A particularly transformative moment occurred when she met with Luisa again, days after that initial conversation. This time, Luisa was quiet, head lowered, holding a small, cracked mirror. When Camila approached and asked what was wrong, the young woman simply looked at her, and with tears in her eyes, spoke about her fear of never overcoming everything she had been through. Camila, without thinking, sat beside her, took her hand, and told her that even though the path was hard, she would be there to help in whatever way was needed. That night, upon returning home, Camilla reflected deeply on everything she was experiencing at the clinic. For so long, she had built her life around the idea of being strong, of being someone who never showed weakness. But upon seeing the strength of people like Luisa, who faced invisible battles every day, she realized that being strong didn't mean being isolated. True power lay in compassion, in the ability to care for others, to place oneself in the shoes of those who needed it most. The experiences at the clinic had stripped Camilla of her armor. For the first time, she felt grateful, not for the trophies she had earned, but for the chance to share, to listen, and to love without judgment. She understood that her mother had always tried to teach her about the value of love and compassion, but until now, she had never truly understood. Raoul was now in his second week living in the fishing village, and the changes in his routine were becoming impossible to ignore. At first, he thought it would just be a temporary sacrifice, something he could tolerate for a while in exchange for the inheritance. But life here, with the sea and the intense labor, was forcing him to confront things he had never anticipated. Each dawn found him more exhausted, and the work of fishing, with its demands and grueling routine, felt like an insurmountable challenge for someone so used to comfort. The sound of nets being dragged, the smell of fish hanging in the air, and the constant presence of the villagers created an atmosphere he initially viewed as almost a punishment. However, his daily contact with the local fishermen, especially with So Huang, a wise, soft-spoken man, began to transform his view of the community. So Huang was a veteran of the sea, with fascinating stories and a calmness that seemed impossible for someone living such a harsh life. One morning, while helping to pull in an especially heavy net, Raoul felt the steady support of So Huang at his side. The fisherman had noticed the young man's struggle and, with a simple gesture, offered him a word of encouragement. "Here, son, we never pull alone. Every effort is teamwork." These words, though simple, reverberated within Raoul, who had always believed that his life had to be built by his own hands, without relying on anyone. Slowly, he began to understand that in the village, solidarity wasn't a choice. It was a necessity for everyone's survival. As the days passed, Raoul began to observe the fishermen's routines more closely. He noticed how they helped each other, shared their wins and losses, and were always ready to assist one another in times of hardship. He started to join in small local celebrations and help distribute fish among the families. These gestures of cooperation and simplicity, which once seemed outdated and pointless to him, began to show a different kind of value, something he had never found in his shallow friendships and luxurious parties back in the city. One starry night after a long day's work, Raoul was invited to join the fishermen around a fire where they shared stories and laughter. One of the fishermen, with a playful smile, asked him what had brought him there in the first place. Raoul hesitated, unsure of how to answer. He felt ashamed to say he was there because of an inheritance. Noticing his discomfort, So Huang placed a firm hand on his shoulder and said, "Sometimes the sea brings us exactly where we need to be, even if we don't understand why." Those words led Raoul to a deep reflection. For so long, he had pursued fleeting pleasures, material goods, and social recognition. But here, in this simple, welcoming environment, he was discovering something new and genuine. These people, with so little, demonstrated a joy for life that he had never experienced in his material pursuits. There was a lightness in the village's way of life, an invisible wealth he was beginning to admire. In the final days of his stay, Raoul already felt like a part of the community. Though he still found it difficult to adapt completely, he no longer felt like an outsider. On the contrary, he had begun to help spontaneously, to offer his strength, and to share moments of gratitude with those who had welcomed him without judgment. One evening, with the sound of the sea echoing in the distance, Raoul reflected on how the simplicity of this life made him feel more complete, more human. On the last day, as he said goodbye to the fisherman and to Sohuam, Raoul felt a tightness in his chest. He thanked them all with a heartfelt hug and promised to return to visit them. As he left the village, he realized he was leaving behind more than just an experience. He was leaving a part of himself that he had never known before. After weeks immersed in such distinct and intense experiences, Miguel, Camila, and Raoul finally returned home. Each of them carried in their gaze and gestures subtle but profound changes that only time and their interaction with each other would fully reveal. Their mother's house, now empty and silent, seemed even more imposing and mysterious. It was as if the walls held the stories each of them had lived while they were away, waiting for the moment when they would come together to share the transformations each had experienced. The three gathered in the main hall where Teresa awaited them. Her eyes held a spark of expectation and affection, as if she could see the changes in each of them just from their gestures and the expressions on their faces. Miguel appeared calmer and less hurried, observing each detail around him, like someone who now understands the value of presence. Camila, once so rigid and formal, now had a more serene and gentle look, radiating an empathy that had never been visible before. Raoul, who once exuded arrogance, now seemed more humble and at ease, his shoulders relaxed and a genuine smile on his face. Teresa invited them to sit, and one by one, they began to share their experiences. Miguel, who had always been the authoritative and controlling leader, spoke about the silence and the peace he had discovered at the monastery. He described the initial struggle to accept that reality and how, little by little, he found the serenity he had been seeking. I realized that the control I'd always wanted was really just a way to escape myself, he said, with a calm that surprised his siblings. Camila was next. She recounted her experiences at the clinic, the emotional challenges she had faced while dealing with others' suffering, and how she had learned the importance of compassion. "I never imagined I could care so much for people I didn't even know," she said, visibly moved. "But each person there taught me something about human strength and how much I needed to open my own heart." Raoul then shared his time in the fishing village. He spoke about the humility and value of teamwork, about the lessons in solidarity he learned from people who, with so little, showed a richness of spirit he had never encountered in his luxurious life. "Life is simpler than I thought, and at the same time, much richer than all the things I once valued." Teresa listened intently to each story, her face serene and full of pride. Then, after a brief silence, she stood up and walked over to a small wooden box on the table. "There's something you need to know," she said quietly. The three siblings exchanged glances, feeling a mix of curiosity and tension. Teresa opened the box and took out an old envelope. "Sophia, your mother, she's alive." Shock flooded the room. Miguel, Camila, and Raoul looked at Teresa in disbelief, trying to process the revelation. "But how? Why?" Miguel was the first to break the silence, his voice trembling. Teresa then explained Sophia's plan, the drastic decision to fake her own death so they could confront the lessons she had always wanted them to learn. "The test was for all of you," Teresa continued, her words filled with emotion. "Your mother wanted each of you to reconnect with what truly matters, to discover humility, empathy, and the importance of opening yourselves to the world around you. She believed this was the only way." The revelation stirred a wave of emotions, each sibling reacting in their own unique way. The initial shock gave way to a mix of relief and longing. They now understood Sophia's sacrifice, the immense love that had driven her to make such a radical decision. They felt profoundly grateful, touched by how she had planned every detail in the hope that they would become better versions of themselves. In that moment, the three siblings embraced in silence. The resentments, the distances, and the differences that had once separated them seemed to dissolve. They didn't need more words. Everything they felt and thought was there in that tight embrace and in the tears streaming down their faces. Teresa smiled, watching the fraternal love rekindle between them. She knew this was the beginning of a new phase, where the three, finally reconciled, would be ready for a reunion with Sophia, not just as her children, but as transformed people, united by a deeper and truer bond. A few days after the revelation, Miguel, Camila, and Raúl finally prepared to reunite with their mother. Each heart beat with a mix of anticipation, gratitude, and renewal. Teresa took them to Sophia's home, a simple house in a rural area, where she had spent the past months planning what would become the greatest lesson of her life for her children. When they arrived, they found Sophia waiting on the porch, her gaze emotional and her posture serene. She looked more at peace than ever, as if she knew that everything she had endured had been necessary. Seeing them, Sophia broke into a warm, welcoming smile. The three siblings walked toward her, pausing for a moment as if still processing the reunion. Then, without a word, they all embraced her together, each feeling the intensity of the moment. Sophia closed her eyes, holding her children tightly, as if to remember all the years and every moment they had lived together. Her tear-filled eyes reflected the love and devotion that had driven her to take such a radical step. They sat around a table in the garden, and Sophia asked each of them to share what they had experienced during their time apart. She listened patiently to each story. The transformative silence Miguel had found, the compassion that had blossomed within Camila, and the humility and sense of community that had awakened in Raúl. Sophia's tears flowed as they recounted the changes they had felt and the lessons they would carry for the rest of their lives. When everyone had finished speaking, Sophia took a deep breath, as if absorbing each word and reflecting on the impact of her plan. "All I ever wanted for you was to be good people, compassionate, capable of love, and able to connect with the world and with each other," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "It wasn't easy to make this decision, but seeing you here, together and transformed, made every sacrifice worth it." After an afternoon filled with laughter, tears, and memories, Sophia stood and invited them to do something special. She took a small tree sapling, carefully prepared, and led her children to a corner of the garden. "I want us to plant this tree together," she said. "Let it be a symbol of our reunion and of the new roots you have planted within yourselves." Miguel, Camila, and Raúl exchanged glances, understanding the depth of the gesture. Together, with their hands still intertwined, they dug into the earth and carefully planted the sapling, which now symbolized the family's rebirth. As they filled in the soil around it, they felt that, like the tree, their relationship with Sophia and with each other had been renewed and strengthened. When they finished, they looked at the small sapling with admiration and respect. Miguel held his mother's hand, Camila rested her hand on Raúl's shoulder, and there, in the silence of the garden, each made a silent promise to honor Sophia's legacy, a legacy of love, humility, and empathy. The sun began to set, casting a soft golden glow over the scene. Sophia felt filled with a peace she had never experienced before. She knew that her children were now ready to move forward with the lessons she had so wished to impart. As they left the garden, the small shrub seemed more than just a plant. It was the symbol of a new beginning, a silent commitment to live with greater meaning, always remembering the values Sophia had nurtured. And hand in hand, they walked on, ready to begin a fuller, more united life, guided by the bonds of love they now knew to be indestructible. Did you enjoy this moving story about family, reconnection, and transformation as much as we did? If it touched you, Don't forget to give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Comment below. Which challenge do you think you'd find hardest to face? Miguel's silence, Camilla's compassion, or Raul's simplicity? Let us know why. We love hearing your stories and reflections. And if there was a part that really resonated with you, share it in the comments. Who knows, maybe we'll do more videos like this, diving into themes that make us reflect on what truly matters in life. So, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this with someone who might enjoy this journey of transformation too. See you next time.